In this video, we are going to be looking at how to play against one knight f3 with the black pieces, and we are going to do that by looking at a game played between a 2000 rated player against a grandmaster whose name is Li Chao. And this game was played in 2017, and the game is very interesting, so I don't want to waste any further time, so let's start. So first of all, before starting, I want to first of all clarify, we are going to look at the position, which starts with a knight f6, knight f3, knight f6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, sorry about that, short castle, d4, d5, c4, c6, and what happens if white plays knight c3, which is a very common way to continue this position, and here black simply captures the pawn because that's the main line, and here white plays knight to e5. So we are going to discuss this very same position but with a different move order, so let's start. So white starts with 1d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6, g3, bishop g7, short castle, g5, c4, and here black simply took directly, which is also an option, and here white played knight c3, c6, and here from here the main theory begins, or I would say the main game begins. So after c6, now there are three ways for white to continue the position. White can either play a4 stopping b5, white can play knight to e5, or even e4 grabbing more center by sacrificing the pawn on c4. So these are the three key options, but today we are going to focus on what happens if white plays knight to e5. After knight to e5, we are going to play a very interesting move which happened in the game, knight to g4. And what's the idea? After knight g4, black is directly committing that black wants to simply capture the knight. So if white captures the knight, black can capture the knight, and here black is simply a pawn up. So here white is having two options. In the game we had the move f4. What happens if white simply goes for capturing the pawn on c4? After knight c4, black simply captures the d4 pawn with the bishop, h3, knight to e5, knight to e3. And the question is, how will you try to develop your queenside pieces? So here first we develop our bishop, queen c2. The idea is to play the move rook to d1. So first we play the move queen to c8, attacking the pawn on h3. You must note guys, queen to c7 is not a good move because it simply allows knight to b5. You can't really capture the knight because the queen is hanging. So queen c8, king h2, and now first of all bringing the knight rook into the game, and now simply developing the knight via a6, and black has successfully developed all his pieces, and black is already very comfortable, and black is already a pawn up. So going back, that's exactly what happens if white captures the pawn. In the game we had f4, which is also an option, and from here black simply played a very amazing game. First, Li Chao captured the knight. Obviously if you try to capture with the pawn, it's already a bad idea because now you are no longer having the center control as well. I can play the move queen b6 check, followed by rook d8, and black is already better. So white must capture with the f pawn, getting some kind of counterplay on the f file and also having a good center. After f into e5, Li Chao simply strike in the center via playing the move c5, take. If we already try to play something like e3, trying to protect the pawn, it's already a bad idea because I can already play knight c6, putting more pressure, and now you are kind of doomed because you can't really protect the d4 pawn any longer. So you're gonna have to capture the pawn sooner or later, so it doesn't really matter if e3 is in the board or not. So first, white decides to capture the pawn because you can't really push the pawn as well because the e5 pawn would still be hanging. So pawn takes, and here Li Chao first traded off the queen, and then he played the move bishop into e5, capturing the pawn. So already black is a pawn up. So bishop to d5, and here Li Chao simply developed his knight. Bishop to h6 first, rook e8, and here white simply captured the pawn. And here Li Chao idea of developing the knight to c6 was to give a check and capture the pawn on c5. Knight to e4, bishop to b6, knight to g5. Now double attacking the pawn on f7. So here black played the move knight to e5, attacking the bishop and at the same time defending the pawn on f7. So after knight to e5, we had the move bishop to d5 on the board. If white plays bishop to b3, going back with the bishop, we can already play e6 first, defending this pawn, and now our idea is already to play the move knight g4, getting the piece for free, and already another idea is knight e3 check and capture the rook. So white is kind of forced to play h3, covering the g4 square from the knight, And now already bishop d7, knight f3, because the bishop on h6 is not doing much. You have to get the bishop out of here. So knight f3 first, bishop c6, bishop f4, and now you can already trade one pair of knights, and now already e5. And you can simply sense the material count. Black is a pawn up and having good position. So black is already better. So that's why bishop b3 is already a bad move. Bishop d5 was played in the game, but it doesn't really change much. e6, kicking the bishop to f3, and now playing a very good move, f5. At the first glance, it looks like why black is simply weakening up this particular diagonal. So after f5, you are basically taking away the e4 square from the white knight, which is a very interesting move. And after f5, the idea could be to play e5, e4, and once the pawn reaches e4, black is having like simply a beautiful pawn structure. So h4, rook to b8. So basically after h4, black played rook b8 because black first of all wants to develop the bishop, but he can't because the b7 pawn is actually hanging in this position. So first, black defended the pawn, and now bishop d7, and here white finally decided to sacrifice the knight, because like black is already pretty happy in this position. Bishop c6 is coming up, even knight f7, e5, e4, black is already winning. So finally white decided to sacrifice the knight, and here white's idea is to play the move bishop to f4. Basically you can't really protect if you move the rook, you lose the knight, and if you move the knight, you lose the rook. So this is the idea of white. So basically black simply played the move bishop to e4, because here white's idea is to already capture the knight and followed by capturing the bishop as well. So bishop a4, attacking the rook, white captured the knight, takes. So when the dust settles, you can already count the material. Black is a pawn up, because at the very start, black simply captured the pawn on c4. That's because. So after rook into b8, from here the main game begins, because like both the sides are having opposite color bishop. I'm pretty sure that many of the players would like to agree to a draw in this position, but you can even fight for even more. Just look at this position: rook d1, rook c8, check, and now we have the move g4. So if white tries to capture the pawn on b7, already rook to c2 capturing the bishop and the pawn. The king defends the bishop, and already e5, very interesting move, because either of the pawn is already going to collapse. So first, let's better the pawn structure. Rook e7, bishop e5, bishop to d4, and one pawn is going to collapse, and black is already better. So this is the main idea. So g4 was played. Takes. So basically the idea was to simply ruin up the black's pawn structure. Check. e5. Check. So basically if you try to come here, it's already a check and you lose the bishop. So you have to move the king. Takes another pawn. Check. If you can't really capture the pawn in this position because bishop c2 and bishop c7 and you lose the rook. So rook comes, check, and now we have king f3 and capturing another pawn. If you try to defend the pawn, I can still give a check and capture the pawn, so it doesn't really change much. So capturing the pawn, and white captures another pawn. So basically now black is having 2 pawns advantage, and will this be enough to win the game? Check, rook goes back, check, bishop defends the pawn, and how slowly and steadily black decides to push the pawn, advanced with the king, defending this pawn, and now at the right time pushing the pawn, giving a check, making the way for the pawn to push. King advanced, rook defends the pawn, and now black finally decides to push his a pawn. Bishop was hanging, so he defended it. Bishop defends the pawn again. Rook attacks the bishop, and here king tries to make the path for the pawn. The king moves because there could be a huge amount of discoveries. Now simply rook attacks the bishop, and now finally pushing up another pawn. So already how black is slowly advancing in this position, and advancing the pawn again, bishop to e7, and already white simply collapsed with the move bishop to d5, and it's a check, and white simply blunders the rook and black wins the game. It doesn't really change much because this position is still completely winning. Idea of bishop e7 was already to give a check, rook to b2, and already push the pawn while putting the bishop to f6, and this position was already completely winning for black. So it doesn't really change much. Bishop d5 check, and here rook b6 check, and white loses the rook and white resigns the game. So already a very interesting game, and then this game can be considered as a model game to know how to play against the position when your opponent plays the move knight to c3 at the very start. Let me take you back to the position. Knight c3, you capture, and c6, and this particular position. The game is already very interesting. This position can also land in your game via knight f3, knight f6, because this is a very common structure to play. Short castle, g4, g5, c4, c6, and white plays the move knight c3. I'm already going to come up in the next video what happens if white takes, and white is having some ideas with the knight e5, knight c3, and we're going to discuss it in the future videos. But yeah, that's it for today. So if you learned anything new today, make sure to like the video, share this video with everyone, and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you are new to our channel. It's free for you, but it helps us to motivate to make more videos like this. So I don't want to waste any further time. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.